Teach for Nigeria was really founded out of the burden of ensuring that you've seen fellows who got into classrooms where children were not able to read, and in the 2 years that they were there, the children were now.
Molade is a visionary leader dedicated to empowering children and youth across West Africa.
Before her appointment as CEO at Teach for Nigeria, she served as the CEO of West Africa Vocational Education, WAVE, for nearly 6 years, focusing on equipping young people with essential skills and opportunities.
We believe that if we can put out an army of fellows out there who are passionate and dedicated to improving education in Nigeria, we can truly begin to. And our teachers are always looking for new and improved ways of teaching. They go to the hardest, most remote areas in the countries where teachers Teach for Nigeria classroom improved educational outcomes by.
What's one unforgettable moment you had with a teacher while you were growing up?
So I was in JS1. I went to Queen's College. I was in JS1, and we were talking about evolution. So it was a science class, and the teacher asked, how the world was created, and I was very bold. My very bold self. I put my hand up. Coming from, this was JS1. This was when you were first interacting with people, and I got up and I told the story of creation, how God created the earth. It was Adam and Eve and all of that. And I was very, I was going on and on. And teacher just told me, shut up, sit down there. Who told you that was how the world was created? I was very, very confused. Um, and as I was saying this story, the whole class just burst into, into laughter. And it really just comes back to, the teacher was looking for Charles Darwin, right? And that story of evolution that way, I'll never forget. I'll never forget that that day.
If you could describe the impacts of education on your life in one sentence or a few sentences, what would it be?
I mean, maybe I will start off with a background context and say that I think I believe, or I know I've been very privileged to have had good quality education. I've had access to some really good quality education. And when I think back to the impact of education on my life, it's actually beyond the things that I learned in the classroom. In terms of the subjects of math, English, science, those things were great, and I can talk about how those things helped me. But I think I think more about the discipline of education. I think more about the teachers and the educators who challenged me to do more, building resilience and grit. And that for me is one of the biggest impact that education has had on my life. So I think, you think of some really tough subjects and how you were able to pull through, the amount of dedication that you had to put in. So those are the skills for me that, are really helping me today in my career, in my family life, in whatever else that I'm doing. And I think for me, that is I almost say the hidden gems of education that a lot of people don't focus on. So for me, that's just one of the biggest things when I think of having access to quality education in a way that helps you imagine and think differently and just, thrive generally as a complete person.
Can you just give us a lowdown of your background?
Let's see, I grew up in a loving family. I have three other siblings. I'm the second of four children. So I have one sister, an older sister, and two younger brothers. Um, and I grew up in a very happy home. I grew up in a Christian home as well. So hence my story about, creation and Adam and Eve, etc. I went to primary school in Surulere. For anyone who went to K Kotu Memorial Primary School, that's the name of my primary school. It was on Bode Thomas. I was head girl of my primary school. So I've always been a very high achiever from very, very young. But a funny story, a backstory. My mom tells the story of how I wasn't always top of my class. I was probably, then they used to do positions. We don't do them so much this way. You either come with, depending on where you are, they would give you position based on your results. My mom says I used to come maybe 15th, 16th in the class, something around there. And then when maybe it was primary two or so, she now just sat me down and said, Maladi, I know you can do better. I mean, you need to push yourself. And she said that was the last term that I ever got that position. After that, I was always top three. So again, the power of your parents pushing you and the power of your parents being involved in your education. I was just in school. I mean, I could do better, but I was just coasting at that very young age. But anyway, so I was head girl of my primary school. I did my secondary school education at Queen's College. So all the Queen's College, girls out there listening to this, up Queen's, up Blue, and I 6 years of secondary school in QC. I thoroughly, absolutely enjoyed, my time at QC. Some of my closest friends to date are QC girls. I always say that, some of the strong allies that I have, some of the strong relationships that I had are made from QC. I was an athlete in school. A lot of people don't know this. So I used to run. I was in Red House, Danfodio. I used to run. I used to do 4x1 and 100 meters and 200 meters as well. And I was, mostly on the podium. So I was quite athletic. I lost that really after QC, but I participated quite actively in sports in school. Um, Leaving QC, I moved on to the UK. I studied pharmacy. That's another thing that a lot of people don't know about me. I studied pharmacy and I practiced as a pharmacist for over 10 years actually. I worked in the National Health Service. I worked as a hospital pharmacist in the UK. So again, that's a part of me that people don't know. But yes, I enjoyed pharmacy. But working in pharmacy in the UK actually was my first stint into education. My last 3 years of working there, I was seconded to the Kingston University as a teacher facilitator. So I would teach clinical pharmacy on campus, and then I would bring them back to the to the hospital, and we would practicalize the things that you've learned in school. And that was when I started to see this mismatch, right? Where you feel like you know something, but if you didn't have that hands-on experience, work experience, real life experience of what it's like in the field, the practical side, you will just come out with very smart and educated people, first class 2-1, but they struggled, when it came to the practicality. So we were trying to kind of, sort of close that gap. I thoroughly enjoyed that. So I taught undergrads, I taught some postgrads as well. So that was my first stint into education. I now live in Nigeria, and I came back to Nigeria and I worked as a pharmacist still. I worked in, Nigeria's foremost retail pharmacy. I worked at Health Plus Pharmacy at that time. Um, and again, I was doing a bit of learning and development for the pharmacist and the pharmacist staff. So I was still doing a little bit of teaching, education, and I worked as a pharmacist for about 5.5 years, almost 6 years as well. Again, doing a little bit of, I did business development, I did growth. I had an amazing opportunity where I was working with an amazing, a formidable woman, and I grew, drastically. And one thing that I would say again with education, and I say to people, if you are hungry for knowledge and if you are willing to try things out, every opportunity you find yourself in, put your hand up and just say, hey, I want to try. When opportunities arise, hey, I want to do that. I had the opportunity to work in HR. I had the opportunity to work in logistics and supply chain. I had the opportunity to work, doing L&D. Like I said, I did business development. I did some financial. So I got a full, rounded experience while I was at Health Plus. And when it was time to move on from that, and I had the opportunity, my first opportunity to get into the social sector or the development sector as we call it, was when I joined Wave. And if you remember, even when I was saying I was doing L&D at Health Plus, and I was saying we were also trying to just make sure that people were up to date, people had the relevant knowledge, the skills for today, that they will stay relevant in their jobs. Also at the university where I was helping people match education with the world of work. Wave was doing exactly that. Wave was supporting young people who were unemployed from low income backgrounds to get the necessary skills required to access job opportunities. So, I mean, some people don't see what's the logic between pharmacists and that. But honestly, all of that I was doing was just preparing me to be able to sort of do this work. And over the 6 years, almost 6 years that I was at Wave as well, we're doing some incredible work in just helping people find employment, helping people who had been locked out of the job market to get the necessary skills that the job market was crying for, and getting them matched to jobs.
Many parents, particularly Nigerian parents today, are frustrated with the quality of education that their children are receiving, you know. So you've had vast experience in that sector, of course, no doubt. What practical steps, based on your experience, do you think parents can take to ensure that their children are able to access not just education, but quality, world-class education?
So I think first of all, it's important for us um, to understand that parents are their first child's educator. You are your child's first teacher, if that sort of makes any sense. And also, it's important to note that even as our children go to schools, we don't outsource education to the teachers. It's a partnership and a collaboration. So I always say to parents that yes, quality of education could be better, and I don't know that it is, just a Nigeria problem or it's a Nigeria issue. It's global. When you speak to people in the education sector, they tell you all of this. But we have to partner and collaborate with the educators to be able to help our children get to where we want them to get to. So parents have to be interested in the education of their children. Parents have to be interested in building these leaders. So what does that even begin to look like? So how many parents understand, okay, what's your curriculum, regardless of what age you are? Are you aware of what the curriculum of your child is in the different subjects? Are you aware of what they're being taught when they're being taught it? Do you understand how your child learns? Because again, a teacher or an educator may or may not have that skill. And even if they do, they are dealing with, in the best of schools, 1 to 15 to 20. In some schools, it's 1 to 50 to 60 to 70. So again, if I as a parent understand that, hey, my child is a visual learner, how am I having conversations with the educator to say, or with my children's teachers to say, hey, this is how best my child learns? And even if they don't have the resources in the schools, as an example, how am I then helping my child augment their learning? So if I know that my child is a visual learner, and they're teaching, let me give an example, history. My daughter is a very visual learner as well. They're teaching history. So me, I'm always looking for videos on YouTube that talk about, and animated videos. That's the sort of thing that she likes. So you're still teaching the subject, but because I understand that that's the best way she learns, I'm not going to stick a textbook in her face and just ask her to sit and be learning dates and cramming. That she's never going to learn that way. But if I give her a video, she watches that same thing, presto, she's good. So I think some of the things, so leveraging technology which is widely available to us. Let's spend less time scrolling through the pages of scrolling through the streets of Instagram as parents, and let's use that technology to help our children learn. Honestly, technology is here to stay. So let's not run away from it. Let's embrace it. Let's also understand where our children's strengths and weaknesses are, and how we can learn them. There's many tools online that will tell you how to identify your child's learning strength, or how your child learns. So if you don't know, there are ways of doing that. And more importantly, I think it's that collaboration and partnership that I said. Let's not outsource, you know, training just to the teachers. Let's work hand in hand with them to be able to really help our kids get the quality education that they truly deserve.
How can teachers, schools, address this gap effectively with the tools they currently have? I mean, let's leave the government out for now. You know, we have this challenge. Based on what we currently have, how do you think teachers and schools can address this gap, right now?
The last UNICEF report showed that up to 70% of children in primary school um, cannot read or write up until their level. And the same the same percentage for numeracy levels as well. And this is basic math, addition, subtraction, division, etc. So there is a real problem. You talk about the gap. The gaps are, if you look at, so in Nigeria, for instance, we have public schools, or schools that are owned by the government. We have private schools. And when you even look at private schools, you have low fee paying private schools. You have, this sort of other private schools as well. The gap, it's not the same. The level of teaching, and there are many reasons. We could sit here and talk about why do we think some of those things exist. One, teaching profession, um, the prestige has been stripped from it. So nobody wants to go and teach anymore. It just sounds like, I don't want to be a teacher. It almost seems like if I can't do anything else is when I will sort of do a teacher. So I know you said, let's not talk about government, but I do feel like, we need to also have, just that conversation to say, how can we remunerate our teachers better, compensate them better? Um, if you ask some people, who are some of the people that helped you in life, that put you on this track? Teachers will be, you mentioned five, you would mention a teacher. So there is the gap in the education sector. There is the gap in the outcomes, educational outcomes of children. And then there's also, depending on where you are in the country, some states are doing amazing work, some states are trying, they're struggling, but the gap is also there depending on sort of where you are. But what can schools do? I think that when we begin to think about how can we improve, or shorten this gap, or actually bridge this gap, I think that there are things that, I teach for Nigeria. One of the things that we're beginning to implement is foundational learning and numeracy. I think we need to move away from the outdated way of teaching, and we need to look at newer, more creative ways of teaching. So, especially in primary school, looking at how do we make teaching fun, and while we're making it fun, people are learning, as well. And understanding that we just need the basic recognition of numbers, simple addition of numbers, three-letter words, etc., etc. Making use. I may not have technology, but one of the things that I watched the other day, one of our fellows was, you use sand to draw something, capture stones that you have around you, create a game out of that, and help people be able to recognize numbers. Do it outside. Take the classroom into, outside, rather than in the four walls of an actual classroom. I think that those are some of the things that we can sort of begin to do. Schools can also engage in things like collaboration with others. So what are others doing that are getting better outcomes? No man is an island. I think we need to get involved in learning more about what people are doing. Again, I come back to technology. The internet has made the world such a smaller space now. So I don't need to travel I don't need to travel abroad to see some of the best practices that are happening there with low cost tools, and et cetera, et cetera. So even if it's just, let's buy a little bit of data. Let's spend a little bit of resources that we have. And today, the head teacher is saying we're going to learn how to teach numeracy in a different, creative way. And you gather everybody together. I think that those are some of the things that we can sort of begin to do. I'll give an example as I sort of wrap up on this point. We have a fellow I teach for Nigeria. His name is Olayinka. He's in Ilukwiji Grammar School. He teaches his students space. He teaches them about space. And that may sound like he works in a public school, he's teaching about space. But he uses that to also build critical thinking, problem solving. He does a little bit of math, a little bit of English, and he doesn't have access to many resources. But when you see how Olayinka teaches them, he uses string. They built a rocket out of paper, and he's able to show them how a rocket works. They were able to launch a rocket by using old pipes, a bottle, a water bottle, and to act as the force to be able to propel that. So there are ways of doing this. It's not until I have so much money, and I'm saying I can't buy these fancy resources, but there are materials all around us, everyday materials that we can actually use to help children in an innovative way to actually improve the outcomes.
So, from your experience, both as a parent, of course, as an education expert, what strategies have you found most effective that can be useful for parents to raise confident, well-rounded leaders for tomorrow?
So I think that, especially maybe in this part of the world, sometimes we focus a little bit too much on academic excellence. And I'm not in any way saying that that isn't good, or that isn't necessary, or that we shouldn't. But at my work at Wave, I remember a quote that I'd liked, where someone said, "You will get hired for your credentials. So your academics will get you through the door, but it's your character that will keep you on the job." What that tells me is academics is great, but to get that well-roundedness, you need to have good character. And what are we talking about with with good character, and good competencies? Apart from the problem solving, good communication, critical thinking, teamwork, etc. But it's also your values. So I think the first thing that I would say to answer your question is, what are your values as a family? And do your children understand what those values are? And those values, are they values you just say, or they're values that you live by? We have a family creed as an example, and the family creed just tells us all of the things that we stand for. So we don't do certain things. And when my daughter was younger, I was really able to say that your behavior, is it in line with our family creed? I think secondly is involving children in decision making. A lot of times we feel like they're too young. I will make all of the decisions for them. I'll give examples, simple things around what clubs do you want, after school clubs do you want to do? A lot of times we sit as parents and we pick all of the after school clubs that they want. But I say change that around, and get them to sit with you and say, these are the list of after school clubs. Which clubs would you want to do and why? Now, of course, as a parent, you can guide them, but rather than forcing a decision on them, be saying, okay, I think you should take piano because it does X, Y, and Z. I think you should do this. But allow them to be a part of that decision making. That builds, brain elasticity as they get older. It's a character building. They're not so dependent that they can't make decisions on their own, as an example. And also, being allowing them to be observant. So I'll tell you one thing that my husband used to do. I was talking about my daughter being visual and with numbers. We would be driving on the road. My daughter initially, she used to hate this task. We'll be driving and he would see plate numbers on the car and he would say, "Oh, that car, add up all the plate numbers." Um, and again, for me, it started off as a game. She didn't like it, but it helped her build, quick think, because that car will go. You need to think, you need to think of that numbers. So is what are those, when let's not be so fixated on just academics. Let's also balance it out with other things. And let's spend quality time with our kids as well. I feel like that's a very critical way of helping sort of build and restating those values that we have all built over and over and over again, and just helping them see that there's sort of more to life than academics as well. You need to know how to write a letter. You need to know how to use technology, how to do PowerPoint presentations. In the early days, we'll tell my daughter, go and do a PowerPoint presentation for you want to present something to us. Expose them to those tools, and then communicate, have conversations during quality time, get to find out what you're doing, why you're doing certain things. It's important that we're also having those sort of open communication with our kids as well.